Hey, thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Joshi, and in just a few moments you will meet my good friend Carmelo. We are two guys from two different backgrounds, united in our desire to explore life and culture in regards to the gospel. And this week we are joined by our good friend Parker Settecase from the podcast Parker's Ponces, and we will be discussing the impact philosophy can have in our understanding of the good news. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of ground to cover, so let's dive right in today. This is episode 2 of In Regards to the Gospel. Well, hey, welcome again to In Regards to the Gospel. So honored that you would listen to this podcast. We actually have a very special guest with us today. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, thank you so much for listening and subscribing. If you haven't done so, please do so. Subscribe.
Please do
to our YouTube channel. We're having some technical difficulties. We're not on Apple Podcasts yet, but we're on all the big names, the Google Podcast,
the
Spotify, Anchor. We're on all of those. So do us a favor, please subscribe or like or rate our podcast if it's helpful to you. If it's not helpful to you, just don't say anything and quietly fade into the abyss, please. And if you do like it, though, please leave a positive review. But yeah, hey, one of our dreams as a podcast when we first started this was how does the gospel, the good news of Jesus, impact every area of our life? And one of the reasons I first started even thinking about all this was because of our guest today, was because of Parker. Parker Settecase. How you doing, man?
Hey, good to be here, man.
Dude, it's good to have you. You've always made me question why I do what I do, so that's really good, actually.
I've tried to actually make you. I've forced you to watch YouTube videos when you wanted to go to bed.
It's 2 a.m, Parker.
No, you have to watch this again, just one more time, dude.
And it's sometimes it was just the same clip. You were just so hyped about it.
Had to have someone else get as hyped as me.
I had to.
And you weren't. You'd fall asleep. It's great. Thanks, man.
So Parker, what are you doing right now for school? Getting your degree? I think your master's degree, right?
That's right.
In philosophy.
Nope. So I'm working on 2 degrees. One is in systematic theology.
Wow.
And one is in theological studies. And there's a lot of overlap there.
There's no philosophy in there at all. So I was
depending on how you define, right? So we'll get into that. But yeah, so I'm actually I'm applying to philosophy programs right now.
Oh, great.
Yeah. So I'll be done in the spring, and then Lord willing, go on to just a raw, straight up philosophy degree.
Wow. And that's going to be your master's as well, a master's.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
The PhD program's not accepting people until 2022.
Oh, wow.
So that's terrible news.
Is that because of COVID?
Yeah. All the other guys won't get out. They won't finish. Get out. Got it. Finish your stuff. Go away.
I guess that makes sense.
Get yourself together.
For your boy.
That's all right. I'm excited because I want to learn some more. So master's will be good.
Dude, that's awesome. Well, thanks for coming on today, man.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it.
Sorry to disappoint you in that you thought I was doing philosophy and you don't even know your friend enough to know.
Well, it would be nice if you...
all my papers I write are on philosophy.
Yeah, it's very easy to get confused.
Yeah. I like the interplay between theology and philosophy.
That's good.
A lot of people today are saying that's kind of an artificial boundary. A lot of Christian philosophers, Christian theologians are saying somewhere along the line the two got separated so much where you go, no, this is philosophy and this is theology. And yeah, man, all the best questions in philosophy have to do with God. That's where the most is at stake. It's amazing. It's awesome. Wow. So, yeah, there's a huge movement to say, hey, look, we're not splitting these things up anymore.
That's awesome, man. I'm honored that you be on here, and I'm really excited if you're curious about philosophy like I was, curious about how that plays together with theology. It's going to be a great episode for all of us. And like I said, Parker was a huge reason into why. In the beginning, like when we were in college together, like I felt like we were on like a very similar like journey spiritually, a very similar like point in our understanding of Christ, understanding of our sin, understand all those things. I feel like the Lord really brought us through that season and we grew as friends.
Yeah.
But apart from the gospel, I don't know.
No,
if
yeah,
we grew friends.
He's making a joke because one of our other friends would always say, hey, if we weren't Christians, we wouldn't be friends at all. You're white, I'm Indian, and you just go on and on about how we should not be friends, and it was only this thread of Christianity that's holding on. And I was like, man, I don't know. I thought we would be friends too. Like, I like you as a person, but all right.
No, if it wasn't for that time.
Yeah.
No, seriously though. So let's get right into it. Parker, you could answer this question for us. Why is philosophy even important? Like, why does it matter? What is it, first off? And then why does it matter?
Yeah. So actually, I wanted to give a shout out to Taylor Sear. You talked about how you read his article at TGC. Taylor's a good friend of mine. I love that guy. He gave me an opportunity to teach yesterday to his philosophy class on my master's thesis, which was awesome. The dude's the man. So shout out Taylor. Go read that article actually too, because he's going to do a little bit better job than I might. But you should have had Taylor on, I guess. Philosophy is it's notoriously tricky to define because that's what philosophers do. Like, they argue about definitions all day long. Yeah. So some philosophers, like a Roger Scruton, will say the quest of philosophy is a search for its own definition. Like, all these dudes, like, what do you mean by mean? Right? So what does philosophy mean? What does the word mean? Well, what does meaning mean? What is meaning? And then you go on and on and on. And right. It's like, it's actually really important. It sounds really pedantic. You say, let's not get into semantics here, but good philosopher will say semantics is a study of meaning. We have to get into semantics. So a classical definition of philosophy is the love of wisdom. And you see like the classical old school guys, Socrates, Plato, that's like the classical. They want wisdom, and they want wisdom to live well. Mm-hmm. And so what's the good life? Well, what is the good then? How do we know what the good is? And is this good? Is that good? What is justice? What is righteousness? What is the nature of the good? And then what is bad? Mm-hmm. And so thinking through these things, not in abstraction from life though. And sometimes people think that's what philosophy is. The philosophy is you go into some room in your ivory tower and you talk about epistemology and how we know what we can know. It started as, how can we know what we can know in order to live well? Yeah. And there's philosophers
you do
still
have an ivory tower, right?
Oh, of course. So you have to have an ivory tower. What good is all this studying if you don't get an ivory tower? Yeah. No, but that's a bad caricature of philosophy. Philosophers still do that. They still want to know what's up for life. Some don't. Right. But some do, and so it's hard to paint with a broad brush, but I like the definition. Philosophy is the love of wisdom, and it's like a systematic look at the world. And I say world, not the planet, not the earth, because what else do I want to say? I want to say world because in philosophy, world includes a lot more than physical stuff. Yeah. It includes abstract objects like this is a cup, but like the abstract idea of a cup. Like, that's part of the world, right? So the world includes abstracta, what philosophers call it, includes your soul, things that are material, immaterial. So I would say like a systematic study of the world. Yeah, that's a decent definition, I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thanks, man.
So why does it matter to us?
In saying all that.
Yeah, so where do you live? The world, man. You live here, right? It's like, if there's no such thing as immaterial objects, then you don't have a soul and there is no God. And this whole thing's a big joke. And we're descended from apes and yet we're wearing clothes. Who cares? This whole thing's a big, stupid joke, dude. We think that we matter. We think that we have intrinsic worth, but it's all a big joke in order to survive so we don't tear each other's heads off. It's a really big question. Are there immaterial objects? And then if there are immaterial objects, how does that relate to God? So if there's a Platonic realm of cups and tables, right? So like this is a table, but that's a table, and that's a table. That's like a coffee table. I don't know what that table is. What do you call it? I don't know what this is either. What do you call it? It's just like a tall table. Yeah, countertop table. What makes all three things tables? Yeah. Well, they have, it's the description of them. Mm-hmm. But they're all conforming to some kind of form of table. And you can make a really good argument, and it's called Platonism. There's this realm out there of abstract objects, and that we recognize things based on that. We have some kind of connection to that realm. But if there's this realm, how does God relate to that? Does God have to pick from this realm in order to make tables? He's got to go, I need to look at the form of table. I need to grab that. I'm going to go make that coffee table and whatever we call this giraffe table. Does he have to do that?
Table.
Yeah. And is God, that messes with the doctrine of aseity, that God is of himself. Mm-hmm. If there's this Platonic realm that God has to pull from, then there's something that exists alongside of God for all of eternity. And if goodness is a form, then are things good because God says they're good? And then it's kind of arbitrary and he could say rape is good? Or does God pull goodness from the Platonic form and he has to conform himself to that good? And if that's the case, maybe we should worship that Platonic form instead of him. So now we're getting into theology, philosophy right away.
My mind is just right now.
Well, so philosophy is important because it shapes how we view God. It helps us think through, hey, we need to look at scripture and we need to say this, this, and this. Okay, but what about this now? What about Platonic forms? Well, I don't know. I just study the gospel. Well, the gospel applies to this, man. Like, who is God? Is he triune? Is he a Trinitarian God? Mm-hmm. Well, no, we got to think through that. We can borrow some tools from philosophy to think through and clarify our theology.
That's good.
And there's all sorts of problems too, right? We talked about, it's called the Euthyphro dilemma, raised by Socrates. Socrates in Plato's dialogues. Plato always wrote Socrates in Socrates' mouth, right? So that was like his character. So he's like, Socrates says this, but it's really Plato behind the scenes. Mm-hmm. Socrates asks Euthyphro, what's the nature of piety? Is an action pious because the gods say that it's pious, or is it pious in and of itself? And now he made this dilemma, because if the gods say it's pious, well, there's all different types of gods and they all disagree. Mm-hmm. So that can't be it. So then there must be this other form out there. And so it's a good refutation of many gods, but then an atheist will grab that and apply that to Christianity. Is being good because God says so, or because God has to conform himself to the form of goodness? Mm-hmm. And so as a Christian, we say, well, that's a false dilemma. There's a third option. God's nature is good. What he says is good because it conforms to his own nature. He is goodness itself. Mm-hmm. And the goodness that Plato was getting at has a name, and it's Yahweh. It's not an impersonal, abstract object. He is God. And turns out he is a Trinitarian God. And it's sick, dude. We need to know that.
It's like the X-17 stuff.
It's so good. Yeah, exactly. So we need philosophy, but philosophy needs theology, I would say, as well. Mm. Like when we bifurcate them, they both start turning in on themselves. And I don't think you can really do it. I think you're doing theology when you're doing philosophy anyways. I think you're doing a little bit of philosophy when you're doing theology. I think they go together really well. Yeah, but when you separate them, everything gets jacked up.
Dude, that's amazing. It's going to take some time to digest
went on a
all
tangent
that.
There, man.
No, that's good, though.
Got the coffee going.
I mean, that goes to the question, why philosophy? And I think the fact that, the tangent that you just went on was a good one. Thanks. Because it's going to force people to think. And I think people should think in a logical sense when it pertains to the gospel.
Yeah.
We have a tendency to do exactly what you just said. We'll separate the two. We want to try to distance ourselves from philosophy, and then we don't ask the more pertinent questions that we should. And then we'll start attributing things to the gospel that aren't there, or we don't ask the right questions as it pertains to the gospel. And then when you get someone who would take the philosophy and then they're talking to a Christian and you're trying to witness to them, like you said, with an atheist, they're going to use philosophical terms or use certain, tools from philosophy and totally dismantle the argument.
Right.
And I think that's important, that we should, think through those questions, not just, that God is just out there, but that he is goodness.
Yeah.
Not that there's this other abstract idea of goodness and God fits into that. No,
right.
God himself is goodness. He's the source of goodness. So it points everything back to the creator himself. And then everything else kind of falls in line with that. That's awesome.
Yeah. I love it.
That Taylor's, can you please tell me how to say his last name properly?
Sear
article that we've addressed. We'll have it in the show notes for you as well. Please check it out, because it was super helpful to me to just even have like a framework for understanding, okay, why. And he addresses this this verse in Colossians where it says, "See to it that no one takes you captive by philosophy and empty deceit, according to human tradition, according to the elemental spirits of the world, and not according to Christ. And he goes on to say, like, some people took that to say, like, so never step into philosophy. So, like, there's probably some people listening right now that might have even, like, I don't even know why I'm listening to this episode. Why do we do this philosophical? That's a word, right? Philosophical.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So, as you can tell, we've been friends for a long time.
Not after this.
Not after
this. We had a good run.
Why should we? What did Paul mean by that, and why should we? You kind of addressed it already, but.
Dude, Paul was a good philosopher, actually, too. Yeah. So Paul, I think it's in Titus. He's talking about Cretins, because there's these Cretins from Crete, and they are Judaizers, and they're coming through, and they're like messing with the Christians, and they're saying you got to get circumcised and all this kind of stuff. And so he quotes from Epimenides, who's a Cretan philosopher, poet, they'd say, but he's a philosopher, and he says, it's been said that all Cretans are liars, deceptive, evil. This is true. Yeah. Right? And so don't listen to him. What he's mentioning, what he's bringing up is called the liar paradox, or the Epimenides paradox, where Epimenides is a Cretan, right? He's from Crete. So he says all Cretans are liars. Okay? He's a Cretan. Is he right? Like, is that true then? What do you think? Is it true? Because if it's true, then it's a lie, and it's not true. All Cretans are always liars. He's a Cretan, and he said that. If that's true, it's false. But if that's false, it's true. If it's false that all Cretans are liars, then he's telling the truth. But it's false, because he's the one saying it. It's like if I said this next sentence I'm going to say is a lie. Or this sentence I'm saying right now is a lie. Is that true? If it's true, then it's a lie, so it's false. But if it's false, then it's not true. So then it's... And around and around we go. Paul just barrels through that and goes, no, this is true. Go ahead. This is true. And don't listen to him, because he's making a joke. He's using Jewish witticism. He's using Jewish irony there, which is fantastic. It's hilarious. So he knew that, right? Acts 17, he knew the philosophers. He knew what they were talking about. He reasoned with them, and he reasoned with the Jews in the synagogue. Then he's going out in the streets and reasoning. There's a lot of philosophy in Paul. So if Paul can't mean don't study philosophy, because he did it himself, right? So what he means there is philosophy not according to Christ. Even though we probably should have that verse picked up, but he says don't be taken captive by some translations say empty philosophy. I think the King James says vain philosophy, right? Philosophy according to the world, according to the elemental spirits, right? According to whatever he means by elemental spirits. Like there's different philosophies back then, like everything is earth, everything is water, and so he could be mentioning those kind of. Thales said everything was water, that's an element, and he could be referencing the pre-Socratics and saying don't listen to them. He could be mentioning some kind of demonic thing going on too, demonic philosophy. They didn't have a sharp distinction between like spirituality and philosophy, religion stuff. Yeah. So whatever he's saying, whatever he's referencing, he's saying philosophy that's not according to Christ. So that means that there could be philosophy that is according to Christ. I think he goes on to say, like, all things are held together in Christ. Colossians is all about how Christ is preeminent and preeminent over everything, right? So if there's abstract objects, Christ is preeminent over them. If there's the abstract of a table, giraffe table, Christ is eminent over that. It does not exist without him. John 1, nothing that was made was not made without the Logos, without Jesus, without the second person of the Trinity. So whatever there is in the world, it's subject to Christ. Everything. So if there's this realm of study and they're getting at truth, man, we need Christians in that realm of study getting at that truth and being Christians there. So there's a two-way direction. We need Christians there who can speak the philosophical terminology and witness, put the gospel into philosophical categories and terms so they can understand without compromising the gospel. But also we need to take those tools and help the theologians think more clearly about philosophy and theology.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Like, how do you use philosophy? I mean, Paul demonstrated it, actually using the philosophy of the people,
right?
You know, to witness to them, and to show the flaws in their very own thinking or in their own belief systems.
Yeah.
and to bring attention to Christ, which I think is amazing. Like, what are other ways that we can, use philosophy just in our witness every day?
Yeah. So, Paul, Acts 17 people always go to, but it's so good. We have to keep coming back to it. But he's quoting from their poets. I think he quotes from Epimenides there in the first one. Yeah. And then the second one, I forgot who he's quoting, but he's quoting from their own prophets. And he says, in him we live and move and have our being, right? So he couldn't live in temples because in him we live and move and have our being. So he's using the logic of their own system to destroy their own system. It's called a reductio ad absurdum. He's reducing their worldview to an absurdity. He's saying, look, you guys have these temples and you have to go there and worship and you think that the God lives there. But then you've also said that in him, in God, we live and move and have our being. I think he's referring to Zeus there, or that passages. In him we live and move and have our being. If that's the case, then God is immense. He fills the universe. He's way bigger than the temple that you guys think that he lives in. So, of course, you're wrong there. Of course you are. You know that. So he's taking some truth from their philosophy and saying, look, this is the truth. I'm going to put it in proper context for you. And so we can do that with philosophy as well. We can point out errors in their logic. We can sharpen our own minds by studying logic. Logic is a field of philosophy. The study and appraisal of arguments. Is this a good argument? Is this a bad one? And sometimes we like to memorize the informal fallacies. That's question begging. That's right. And then you just toss it out there. But if someone hasn't studied that themselves, you have to explain that to them. So it's not enough to say that's circular argument or that's begging the question. You have to say, why is that bad? That's begging the question because you've assumed what you're trying to prove. You've assumed this, and do you see why that's a bad thing? And you help them come to the truth instead of blasting them and wrecked, destroyed. Put that up as the caption on YouTube. Yeah. So it can be really helpful in witnessing to people in trying to, we want to destroy their view of the world if it's contrary to Christ.
Right.
We want to destroy that for their own good. Yeah. And we want to have our worldview tested as well. Like, does what I believe conform to the laws of thought? And I'm going to say it does, because I think Christ, like, in him all things hold together. Like, the laws of logic, this is a more philosophical thing, but I think they're abstract objects, the laws of logic. I think they are propositions about other propositions that exist eternally in the mind of God. Mm-hmm. And without that, it's like, well, what is the laws of logic? Like, can you go to, I don't know, where would you guys go? What's that place over here?
Which one?
China House? The big one. No. Like, the grocery store.
Oh, Hy-Vee.
Yeah. I love that. I was trying to go local. Can you go to Hy-Vee and get like a pound of logic? Like, no, it's not that kind of thing. Yeah. So where are they? What are they? Well, I would say they're propositions that exist in the mind of God. And so there I would be trying to use some apologetics to give evidence for God's existence, right? But I'm delving into some philosophy here. But then when we come back and you say, hey, I'm a Calvinist, hey, I'm an Arminian, and I believe in free will, and the Calvinist says, I believe in free will, and you're just talking past each other because you haven't defined your terms. What do you mean by free will? Mm-hmm. And Taylor Sear, again, he's a philosopher of free will. Did his PhD on the philosophy of free will. Mm-hmm. And he spent 5 years studying that stuff just in order to say, here's what I mean when I say philosophy of free will. And it's so helpful because now I get to take that and I go, oh, now I need to think through my theology a little bit better. Yeah. And does this conform to what Scripture says? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think we're too easily just like, oh, that's what it is? Okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I think we're too easily swayed in that way. But if we're honest with ourselves, we do question a lot of stuff. Like, at the same time, like, why do we? Maybe sometimes I think we can take it too far in the sense of we can say, oh, I just doubt that, and I'll never know that part about what God means,
right?
Or I'll never know, and we'll just like,
oh yeah.
That's it. That's it for me.
Yeah, we make the mystery jump too quick.
Yeah, like that's all it is.
There is mystery in theology, and like Herman Bavinck, famous theologian, he's like, hey, all of dogmatics or systematic theology, it's all mystery. Why? Because there's this huge gap between God, the original, and creation, the derivative, right? Like, there's this huge gap called it's the creator-creature distinction. Okay, but we can still go pretty far. He's given us his revelation. We're made in his image. Don't pull the mystery card too soon. Yeah. Don't throw away the mystery card. Some people want to grab philosophy and we're going to cut off all the mystery. That's silly. That's not going to happen. Yeah. But you can go pretty far in helping people understand the faith. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Instead of, you need to just believe. Like, maybe, dude, but like, you can also think too.
Well, yeah, Parker, tell us a little bit about your podcast. We'll start with the podcast, and then I got another question for you. Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah, so my podcast is called Parker's Settecase, and it's Ponces if you're French, but I'm not French, and I don't speak French, and I don't want to be pretentious. So everyone's like, why don't you say Ponces? I'm like, because I'm an American swine, dude. Like, I say Pensies, okay? And I don't want to be pretentious. So it's a podcast where we explore philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I just love thinking about random stuff. Yeah. And I have a lot of cool friends. And I'd have all these really great conversations. And I'm like, the whole world would actually love to hear from you about this. Like, we should have just recorded this. And then finally I'm like, we're going to record this. So like I've
kind of our thoughts exactly too.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, like you guys, we've talked about, I want to get people thinking about stuff.
Yeah.
I think people need to think. Like, I think it's a good thing to use your mind and be stretched. I think it's good to hear opposing views on stuff too. Yeah. I don't have a ton of that yet, but like I have different people come on with different views. I want to elevate the conversation. And I started like, I'm going to bring all this stuff down to people, and then I would have guests on, and I would just go out like wild with them and be like, well, what about this? I read one of your obscure journal articles and you said this. And it was like, this is not what I was supposed to be doing. But so what it really is I have my own episodes where I talk about a bunch of stuff that I've written in my classes, and where I have written in my blog posts. And my blog started as Parker's Settecase, and I started that because Pascal, a really famous dude, he has this book called the Ponces, and it's his thoughts. And it's supposed to be an apologetics book, a work of philosophy, defending the faith, theology. But he died before it was finished. Wow. And so now everyone's like kind of cobbling them together. It kind of reads like the book of Proverbs, a bunch of these like wisdom gnomic statements, wisdom sayings. And everyone's like, no, this goes here, and here's his point, and here. And so people will put him in different spots. And I thought, hey, I could get hit by a bus today. And like, I have like notebooks and notebooks full of stuff that I want to say, and I don't want someone cobbling together my stuff and make me into like a psychopath. So I'm gonna just put this out there, and we'll see if it's any good. So then, if you do
that's
listen to
what I'm going to do with this podcast.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, he's gonna be driving the bus. So what I do is I do single episodes. I only have like 12 of those, where I'm trying to bring the cookies down to the bottom shelf here. And so I'll cover things like, will my dog be in heaven? Are dogs in heaven, and will my dog be in heaven? Because those are two different questions.
What's the difference between your dog and everybody else?
Right. Well, it's like, will there just be the form of dog, right? Or is it going to be new dogs? What about Scruffy, dude, my childhood dog? Does he have a soul? Like, look, we have to think through that kind of stuff, right? Because you shouldn't just lie to your little kid and be like, yeah, I'm sure, honey, he's going to be there. What if he's a bad dog? Is there like a gospel for dogs? I don't know. So let's think through that.
Parker's been asking me these questions since like college.
That's right.
It's legitimately what we've talked about when we're helping his. I remember we were helping August and her husband move. And I just remember like talking about that. I'm like, I don't even know
dude.
What I believe about myself anymore.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well, so one of my favorite podcast episodes, my solos, is my journal. Is my pocket journal a Horcrux? You guys ever watch like Harry Potter?
I stayed away from.
Yeah. My parents wouldn't let me watch it when I was a kid, or read the books.
Yeah, we couldn't. I had one book, and my mom was like, I had a bad dream about the book. You can't read the book. So we tossed them.
That's right. That's right, man. That's how we get down when we were in the 90s and stuff, right? Yeah. So a Horcrux, spoiler alert or whatever, but Lord Voldemort puts his like soul in a journal and a bunch of stuff, and you have to like kill the journal. And so there's this theory of the philosophy of mind called the extended mind hypothesis or thesis. So like if you have dementia and your mind's like deteriorating, people will help you and you'll write post-it notes and you put them all over your mirror. Oh, wow. And when you're in your house, you can remember stuff because of the situation you're in. You lived there your whole life. So you have post-its, you have everything in its place, and you can function really well. But you've like pushed your mind outside of your body, out into the world that you live. And you take someone out of that, then you've like you've taken all those memories away. Because they're not in here anymore. They're not in your brain, at least. And your soul uses your brain to function in the world.
Get into the metaphysical. That's
right. And that's metaphysics. So it's really interesting. Like if you wrote a journal, there's this dude who wrote a journal, and he would like give himself all these instructions for the day. He'd look through it, and it would help him survive. If you took that journal away from him and you burned it or something, like, how do you punish that? Like what's the cost there? It's not just like if you took my journal, you like took a part of this dude's mind away from him.
Oh, wow.
So now you have to think through the law. Like, what does that mean, right? So I just go into it and I have so many thoughts, and I have like 50 of these little guys, and there's all these things, and it's like, is my mind really in here, or is it in here? What are these thoughts? And so just thinking through, like, is this a Horcrux? Like, is my mind in there? Is my mind different than my soul? And so we bring it down. So I like those ones. The other ones I have experts on to talk about their field, and it's mostly those guys. They're awesome. Yeah, and gals. I have some gals as well.
That's awesome. I've listened to a few, and so one of the things that we said about this podcast was that we want to help you understand, as we're trying to understand,
right,
how does the gospel impact every area of our life. I think sometimes we just want to look for the cookie cutter answer of like, this is all that we believe, and we believe it, and that's it. Why do we believe it?
Yeah.
What do we actually believe? And I think, Parker, you've personally helped me to like just open my brain up a little bit to try to expand my thinking, like you said, is what you want to do in your podcast. And so if you're thinking, I don't understand all this stuff, you're precisely why we're doing this episode, because I want to help you, and I want to also be thinking through things at a deeper level. So please continue to listen to this episode. Well,
I think that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I've listened to your episode, and I love how, like, thank you so much for listening. Like, oh my gosh, you guys shouldn't be listening. Like, you probably have something else better to do. Oh my gosh, done it like 3 times.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I'm so
really
grateful.
actually
I'm
matters to
and
me.
It's good, man. I'm glad, but it's so funny how many times you do that.
Yeah.
Well, mostly it's just me listening to. So I
That's
like
right.
to be thanked.
You're talking to
as
yourself.
well.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
No, I was thinking about it. What you just brought up, the ability to think beyond just what's on the surface actually would strengthen like your faith.
Yeah.
You know, to not just look at it, oh, well, it says this here, you know, like when it comes to the sacrifice that Christ made, okay, think through that.
Yeah.
The depths of the sacrifice, what it actually means, what are the ramifications, not just for you today, but for, you know, generations throughout time. Mm-hmm. You know, if you start to think of, you know, hey, people from thousands of years ago, well, guess what? That gospel saved them. Mm-hmm. We don't know how long the earth's going to be here, you know, or how things are going to end. How many people will be affected? How many people will get saved through that preaching and seeing the works of Christ throughout time? So it's like, if you start thinking just about the things that we think about in the gospel, you know, in terms of philosophy, you're going to be like, wow, Jesus was just amazing. I thought he was at first, but now he's like even more amazing because of that. Just thinking through things actually helps enhance, you know, everyday life. It makes life better.
Yeah. Yeah, dude, you're absolutely right. And just even thinking back on the heroes of the faith, like the church fathers, these guys were all into philosophy.
Yeah.
They were all doing it. Aquinas and Augustine and Justin Martyr. And like before he was Justin Martyr, he was Justin the philosopher. Like literally, that was what they called him. And it's how do I think about Christ, like this cosmic Christ, not just this man on a cross, but this man on the cross who's also truly God, who's holding together the cosmos. Wow. Like that's crazy to think about.
I forgot the gentleman's name that you had on. Was it Paul Maxwell?
Oh yeah.
Bald guy, beard.
Oh, there's a couple guys, but yeah. Paul Maxwell, yeah.
He said something and it just kind of stuck with me. He's like, I want to know the God that I'm talking to at night.
Right.
And I was just like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
Well, and we were talking about sacrifice, and it's like, was Christ just like beat up? He didn't have any authority anymore. He didn't have any power. And he kind of just, when he came down and he said, well, he was truly God and he was truly man. Colossians talks about all things being held together by Christ. So like the wood of the cross is being held together by the guy who's being hung on it.
Oh, wow.
And if he would have had one instance of like, this hurts or whatever, and just like let it slip, then he could have exploded the whole universe. Yeah. You know what I mean? I would have done that instantly. You know,
right.
Like a wince of pain, you stub your toe and you swear or something.
Yeah.
Like imagine the power that he had. That's and good. Like he, just a little bit of weakness and he's like, oh shoot. and you look around and everything's exploded, like, no, that's real strength. So it's not just this humble Christ who is a weakling and we see him so emaciated. He's the Lion of Judah clawing his way to the cross, holding everything together, holding the whips together as being beaten by them. Like, if he holds all things together, that's what's up. He's God. And he still, and yet he was truly man. So he's truly experiencing the pain and stuff. And when you think about that, man, it puts it in better perspective of who the God is that we worship.
So it gets me thinking like how Christ was demonstrating his strength through something that seems so weak.
Yes.
Like he's being hung on a cross. Right. But at the same time, if you just think of it like that, it's like, yeah, that's terrible. But it's like, no, if you think of it in terms of who he actually was, like this is God who at any moment, like you said, if he just decides to just say, you know what, this is it, it's over.
Yeah.
The existence is no more. And the fact that he was willing to endure the pain, actually experiencing pain, and not saying anything, only demonstrates just like how powerful he really is. Yeah. Even though on the surface it looks weak.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those things where, to me, that question is like, I think that's what that thief was thinking of when he, do you not fear God? Because he probably was thinking like he can destroy this at any moment.
Which they ironically and sarcastically tried to throw back at him, right? The centurions.
Yeah.
And it's so crazy, man.
Yeah.
It's profound. So one of the things that you just finished up, Park, was your thesis.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about just like first, what inspired it, your actual topic, and why you think that matters.
Yeah. Well, okay. So there's this idea that floats around in certain circles of theology, usually in Calvinistic circles, that we can think of God's relation to the world like an author to his book. And C.S. Lewis brought this up. He wasn't a Calvinist. There's been a lot, actually, and I talk about that in my thesis. Dorothy Sayers is another one. She's Catholic, and she brought this up in The Mind of the Maker, a really famous book that she wrote. And so it's helpful for thinking through a lot of different theological dilemmas, problems, like how is it that Jesus is truly God and truly man? Like, what is that? Okay, well, it's like an author who writes himself into the story. So
Stan Lee.
Yeah, Stan Lee does that. I would never go with Stan Lee. Wow, that's interesting. I always go with like C.S. Lewis because I'm a Christian, but Stan Lee's cool too.
Whatever. Yeah, he's rocking the shirt, right?
Dang it. So, let's go with C.S. Lewis because that's what I'm more familiar with. Yeah. So, in Out of the Silent Planet, the first of C.S. Lewis's space trilogy, he writes himself in as the narrator at the end of the story. And it changes the whole perspective of the story because you're like, did this really happen? Like, his main character is written, he's based on J.R.R. Tolkien. Lewis is one of Lewis's best friends. Mm-hmm. His name is Elwyn Ransom, and Elwyn means friend of elves. And it's like, well, who is the friend of elves? Like, that's Tolkien, right? He's a philologist. That's what Tolkien was. Wow. Someone who studies words. And so at the end, he's like, yeah, so then he told me this, and I was doing it, and I was like, I know it's not true. I know this didn't happen. But, like, he's making it seem like this happened, right? And so he entered into the story. He entered in as a character in the story, even though he's the one holding together that universe of the story. Wow. Okay, so qua, there's this thing in philosophy that you go, it's a qua move. So like qua Jesus' human nature, he didn't know the time of his return. Qua his divine nature, of course he did. He's omniscient. So it's a way to parse out different aspects of the character, the attributes of Christ, because he had a real human nature. He had a real divine nature. So if you look at Lewis, like C.S. Lewis in the story has different attributes than C.S. Lewis outside the story. Outside the story, C.S. Lewis is the creator of this universe. Inside the story, he's just another character writing down notes from his friend. And so Lewis inside the story is in Oxford, and he's writing down. Lewis outside the story can go and travel to America or wherever the heck he wants. Different levels of reality. There's different time going on. Yeah. And so that's a really helpful way to think through Christ. He entered into the story, and qua human nature here, certain things he took on limitations of human nature. But qua his divine nature, he's still out there doing all sorts of, holding the universe together. Wow. So it's a really helpful tool for different things like that. Freedom and foreknowledge. So C.S. Lewis, so let's go with Tolkien, because he's another famous one. Tolkien knows the end of the story from the beginning, right? So he's able to see the whole story at once. And so he can see that Bilbo and Frodo are going to have this ring, and, spoiler alerts, I guess. They're going to bring it to Mount Doom while they can still be free to do that, because he's outside of their time, right? So he can say, and then the sword comes down, but then he goes and gets some coffee. And inside the story, they're not like, the sword, I'm frozen. No, there's two different levels of reality, right? You can do this with a lot of things in theology. Well, I talk about freedom and freedom and determination, which let's couch that for a second. But this is a really good analogy for the God-world relation. But if you press it, it seems like it makes God the author of sin and evil, as well as the author of everything else. And that's a big problem, because no one wants to say that in theology.
Right.
Dude, you do not say that God is the author of evil. We have confessions that say, nor was he the author of evil. Right. Don't do that. So if this is such a good analogy, how does it fare against that charge? And that was my project, to say he's the author of the world, but not of sin and evil. And I wanted to take up one of my professor's works and defend his work against the problem of evil, because he talked about this authorial analogy, that God is like an author. Yeah.
So,
and we get into a ton of philosophy in this, because that's where a lot of the charges are coming from. That's how you want to make your opponent's arguments better than they really are. So maybe it's not that good, but you want to make it as good as possible, so you face the hardest one, not the weakest one. So I try to soup up some arguments against this view and then knock them down.
Is this? Can we find this anywhere online? Do you?
Not yet. So I passed and everything, and it was awesome. Yeah, thanks. Van Hooser liked it, which he's the man. John Feinberg, we went at it a while, because I love Feinberg, but he didn't. Yeah, whatever. he ended up liking it. I convinced him. So that was great. And it was really helpful to hear his thoughts. So Lord willing, I'm going to turn it into a book. I got a couple chapters to add, but it's about the problem of evil. It's about this authorial analogy. And so I had to get into what is an analogy versus what's a metaphor. Like that's a big deal. Metaphors are literally false.
Quickly, can you explain the difference between the two?
Yeah. So some would say, I think I probably hold this view. Everything is contentious always, but I would say all metaphors are analogies, but not all analogies are metaphors. And so you are like the wheat of the field, and you're here today and you're gone tomorrow. That's a metaphor, or it's a simile if you say like, but it's a metaphor because it's literally false, but it's like figuratively. There's a figurative truth there. If you say like, am I literally like chaff of the field or wheat of the field? Like, I'm a human being, dude. But in analogy, in the way I use it, I use a strong analogy, and a strong analogy has a small amount of disanalogy. So an analogy, a strong analogy, can be literally true, but not univocally true. So we need to break that down. Univocal, univocal, one voice, same sense. So God is good and I am good, but we're not good in the same sense.
Right.
We're not good in a univocal sense. We're good in an analogical sense. There's an analogy, and an analogy stretches the meaning in order to fit both cases that you're talking about. So goodness can be stretched to fit both God and me, but we're different because God's goodness is himself.
Right.
My goodness is I'm good insofar as I conform to the standard of goodness, right? So I'm not inherently good like God is. He can't be anything but good. I can be. I have been. And maybe I'm not right now good, right? So I'm good in an analogical sense. I'm still, if I am good, maybe I'll say wise. Everything I say to myself, Joshi's wise. Okay, make him feel bad. Joshi's wise. But he's not wise in a univocal sense to God. He's wise in an analogical sense to God because God is wisdom himself. And you are made in his image. Your wisdom is derivative. You can gain and lose wisdom. He can't. Right. And so we have to have that because of the creator-creature distinction. There's going to be analogies when we're referring to things about God and us. And that's really important to do. But a strong analogy is literally true. Like Joshi's wise. That can be literally true.
Yeah.
Joshi's like grass of the field, or Joshi is literally false, right? But figuratively true if you fit that description. Yeah, sure. So that's the difference, is that analogies can be, a strong analogy can be literally true, even though it's not univocally true in the same sense. And metaphors are literally false. So I would say the authorial relation, the authorial depiction of God, some people would say it's a metaphor, and they say because it's literally false. He's not literally an author. Here's where the cash value comes. He's not literally an author. He's not sitting at Starbucks, one level of reality above us, writing the story of reality. That's false. You go, okay, fine, dude. I'm not saying he's literally at Starbucks, but he is the author of the world in an analogical sense to Tolkien writing his world. Well, how? How so? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. God said, let there be light. God created with his words. John 1, literally, Jesus called, or the second person of the Trinity before he steps into humanity as Jesus Christ. The Son is called the Word, and God creates by the Word. Psalm 33:6 talks about God breathing out the stars. That's so epic. He's a star breather. God creates by his words. Jesus heals by his words. Sometimes he says go and put mud on there, but that still has on your eyes and go wash, but he still has his words coming with it. What does he say to the storm? He says, be still. He rebukes it because he has the authority of the author, and then he gives that authority to other characters, right? And so he gives that to Paul, and Paul's able to heal people. He gives that to Peter. It's like the little Sims thing, right? And right? And he gave that to you, and then you have the authority of the author. Awesome. So God is literally the author of the world, though not univocally in the same sense as Tolkien, that he uses paper and pen. God uses space and time to create with his words. We use paper and pen. We use keys and digits or digital. This is your... Yeah.
The universe itself is God's paper.
Yeah, that's right, man. We're living in God's story. Yeah. Like I hate that it's cliche, but his history is his story. Like it actually is, but it's a theodrama. It's God's drama. It's God's story. We live in that. Okay, so then if God predetermined what happens in the story, how can I be free? Because that's the problem. If I'm not free, then everything I do that's evil can be attributed to him. And you could say, well, let's go with Smeagol. Smeagol turned into Gollum. Who's responsible for that? Tolkien or Smeagol? What do you think? Who's responsible for it?
Are we talking from our reality, or are we talking from inside the story?
What do you think?
I would say both.
Yeah.
It depends on the context, though.
It depends on the context. So in the story, people can rightfully blame Smeagol. They do. They kick him out of the village. Right. He goes off into the caves, right? Yeah. And I don't know, maybe the ring had so much influence on him, but he still killed his cousin Dago. Like, dude, you're messed up. But at the other level, you go, dude, Tolkien, you wrote that. You're messed up, dude. Right. Like, he killed him. I'm going to arrest you for murder. You made him murder. Dude, that doesn't make any sense. There's two different levels of reality, right? And so you balloon that back up and you see God's relation to the world. How is it that God's not responsible for sin and evil? Well, just like Tolkien's not responsible for Smeagol's murder of Dago, neither is God responsible for the evil that happens in our world. Yeah, but this is fake. It's a fake world, right? We live in an actual world with real people. Okay, well, if a genie, like, there's this genie case, this guy Paul Manata, great dude, he's insane, he's crazy. But I see him on Facebook all the time. He brought up this genie case, and he says, imagine a genie can grant a wish, and you wish that Lord of the Rings was real. Does that then make it a bad story? Like, it's a good story beforehand, but now that those characters are real in a pocket universe somewhere, now is Tolkien on the hook for murder? Doesn't seem like he is, right? And so that's like the flat authorial analogy, and I get into a little bit more on how God's authorship is still different than our authorship, in that God can write the story and we have reasons for what we do, and God doesn't override our reasons. Right. So he puts us in a situation, and I have reasons for doing what I'm going to do, even though he wrote the story that way. The reasons are my reasons. Right. And he doesn't override, he doesn't manipulate, he doesn't go past my cognitive faculties. So even though he wrote Parker's going to come on this podcast, I had reasons for doing that. Mostly to make myself look awesome, to come on this podcast. No. But right there, there are my reasons still, even though he predetermined that I would be on this podcast. Yeah. I didn't have the choice to do otherwise, but I don't think that's what freedom is anyways. I think freedom is acting on the desires you have. That's good. And so that's a different theory of free will than someone else would have. This is why it all comes full circle back to philosophy.
Yeah. Wow.
Man, that gets you thinking. Like even in terms of
and if
like
it doesn't,
Christ,
something wrong with you.
Right?
Like being God and putting himself in his own story.
Yeah. He's the main character.
But at the same time, the thing of the will that he chose, even inside the story, to make certain decisions as a deity, like that's just blowing my mind, you know, to think of it that way. Just to, you know, start thinking through some other things like theologically.
Yeah.
You know. It's amazing.
Yeah, so I go through a bunch of stuff like that, like you know, well then is God a manipulator? Is God the manipulator? How about like it's called epistemic self-defeat or epistemic self-defeat. So you come to realize that you've been determined to hold the beliefs that you believe. Can you still be justified in that? You were determined to believe that. Whether you saw a proof or not, you were going to believe that. Well, God doesn't work that way. God doesn't this isn't fatalism that you're going to believe in Christ no matter what the circumstances happened. No, he put you in a situation with different people, different pastors, people sharing the gospel, and he went through your mind to do it. He convinced you. He illuminated your mind, and he persuaded you through all different reasons, man. Sometimes he's actively stepping in. Sometimes he's passively letting this happen or that. So it's awesome, man. So all that to say, God literally is the author of reality.
Yeah.
And he's not the author of sin and evil in a way that would make him morally responsible. Satan's the author of sin. He's the father of lies. God was still sovereign over that.
Wow.
It's wild.
Parker, if you had to kind of leave our viewers with just one word, what do you want people to know about theology, philosophy, all this understanding that we have? What do you want to leave people with?
Yeah. So I would want people to be curious. Like that's what I want. I think if you're curious, it's going to take you a long way. Like what does it mean that Christ died for all? What does that mean? Is it literally every person? Is it just the elect? How do you know? How do you figure that out? Just be curious. Keep asking questions. Like we lose that as we grow up. We start as kids. And why? Get that back. That's good. That's a really good thing. Ask the Lord. You can pray and ask him to help you with stuff. We always forget that. Right? Yeah. God, I want to know more stuff. I want you to open my mind. Can you help me? Every day I pray for wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Because that's what Solomon did, and he made him really smart. Not smart enough. Dude, he fell to all sorts of sexual sins. So like, hey, I need help, God. I need help thinking through these things. Can you open my mind? Can you help me with this stuff? So just get curious again. Ask God to help you be curious. That's crazy. You can ask for that, and he will help you. So when you're curious, you will ask more questions. You'll see how hard it is to answer these questions. And Lord willing, it'll breed some unity, and it'll breed a little bit of intellectual humility. Yeah. That the guy across the aisle from you, the guy across the theological spectrum from you, maybe he's not just a dummy who is just evil and wants to ruin your whole life. Maybe he's thought through this more than you. Maybe he's right. Maybe you're wrong. Maybe she's right. But I think if we were all a little bit more curious and understood how hard it is to think through this stuff, we would be a little bit more charitable with each other. That's good. So I think it starts with some curiosity there, and that breeds some intellectual humility, and that'd be good for everybody.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really awesome. And I think the question that everybody has is my dog in heaven?
Yeah. So you could listen to my podcast for that if you want.
Actually, my dog is at home. They're both the only dogs I've ever had, as far as I know.
Oh, will my bunny make it?
Yeah, bunnies. I don't know about bunnies. Probably not cats either. But there's an old Billy Graham quote. I think it's Billy Graham, and he's like, if you need your dog to be happy in heaven, then your dog will be there. And that's like, well, you don't need your dog to be happy in heaven. Like you don't, you'll have God in heaven. So if that's the question, then no, my dog won't be there. You don't need your dog to be happy in heaven. You have God. Like that's literally exchanging the creature for the creator, right? So like you don't need that. So that's a bad answer. So that's really what I go. And I say, hey, I don't know if your dog's going to be in heaven or not, but I know that that's a dumb question or that's a bad answer to give, because that's literally idolatry, man. I'm not trying to just toss that around. I'm just saying Billy Graham was not trying to make idol worshipers, but it's just a trite answer. Yeah. So we can do better.
Boom. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can go to parkersettecase.com, SETTECASE.com for all my blogs, stuff like that. Or you can just find Parker's Pensies. I am on Apple Podcasts.
Yes,
So we have it. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah, that's why I was listening to him.
Go to Apple Podcasts. It's great. All the good podcasts are there. Every single good. All
the great ones never make it.
That's right. You can find me on YouTube, all that good stuff. Twitter. I'm out there.
All the people that will need to hear this podcast will hear it on the right platform.
Yeah, so that's right.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, man. And
this is fun. Yeah. Definitely.
We're going to have some information in the show notes at the bottom of the page to just get you connected to Parker, his blog. At some point, maybe we'll even update it to include your book on there. When you
that'd be sick.
That'd be awesome.
Love that.
But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and we hope you will like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you guys next time.
In regards to the gospel.